Mean Old Lion Media presents Corner Table Talk.
Welcome to Corner Table Talk. I'm your host, Brad Johnson. Here we are exploring subjects related to food plus drink plus culture. You can always reach me with questions or comments about our show at brad@postandbeamhospitality.com. We are inundated with cooking competitions and an assortment of culinary related shows populating the various platform and TV networks that find a way into our homes. Food is big business. If you are African American operating in the culinary world, as I have been for the past 40 years, you probably often felt challenged to find a place in the ecosystem that had room for you. Black food, soul food, food emanating from the African diaspora, or even to be a Black restaurateur. Who tells the story of this long overlooked slice of culinary history? Well, my guest today, thankfully, is taking up a lot of space in that void. Bryant Terry is a James Beard and NAACP Image Award-winning chef, educator, and author. He's renowned for his activism to create a healthy, just, and sustainable food system. San Francisco Magazine included Bryant among 11 of the smartest people in the Bay Area food scene, and Fast Company named him one of 9 people who are changing the future of food. He is the editor-in-chief of 4 Color Books, an imprint of Penguin Random House and 10 Speed Press, and co-principal and innovation director at ZenMe, a creative studio that he founded. Since 2015, Bryant has been the chef in residence at the Museum of the African Diaspora in San Francisco, and he's curating public programming at the intersection of food, farming, health, activism, art, culture, and again, the African diaspora. His 6th book, a collection of recipes, art, and stories, is entitled Black Food, and it was published in 2021. And I'm in the middle of it, and I have to say that it's fantastic. It's all of that. It's art, it's stories, it's writing, it's food. It's a beautiful, beautiful book, and it obviously struck a chord. It's been on most of the acclaimed cookbook lists as the best cookbook of 2021. Bryant graduated from the chef's training program at the Natural Gourmet Institute for Health and Culinary Arts in New York City, and also majoring in English. He graduated with honors from Xavier University. Bryant holds a Master of Arts in History with an emphasis on the African diaspora from NYU, where he studied under historian Robin D.G. Kelly. He lives between Oakland and Napa Valley with his wife and his 2 daughters, and he has taken a few minutes to join us here on Corner Table Talk. Bryant, welcome.
Thank you for having me on, Brad. Such a pleasure.
Yeah, man, it's great to have you. Thank you so much. So we kick things off. I like music. I want to find out what you're listening to, man. What's on your playlist?
Wow. So thank you. That's such a great place to start and just makes me very happy about this interview. Abby Lincoln. I have been just revisiting her body of work. A lot of the stuff, obviously, that she did with Max Roach, her former husband and creative partner. And yeah, just, when I hear Abby Lincoln, it feels like she sets everything right. I think her radical politics and her just softness and just beauty, it just spans the gamut. So Abby Lincoln has been on my mind a lot.
I hear you there, brother. She's, we all love and listen to a lot of Nina Simone, but Abby Lincoln is right next door. Thank you for that. So tell me, what healthy morning beverage do you consume?
Well, I can give you kind of the breakdown. The first thing that I typically consume when I first wake up is a big glass of hot water, just to kind of, get the juices flowing and wake me up. But I try not to be judgmental about it. I've been having coffee a lot, and there's a part of me in the past, I'm like, oh, coffee's just bad. It's just, overstimulating me, and I just need to keep off of it. But I've been enjoying coffee. My buddy Keba Conte owns this coffee company, Red Bay Coffee, and, he talks about coffee being Africa's gift to the world and really pushing us to reimagine the coffee space, because I think oftentimes when we think about coffee in the context of the United States, it's very, white privileged spaces that come to mind. But when we think about, it's particularly, with cafes and that kind of culture, but when you think about the kind of origins, when you think about the seed to table cycle and who's growing and harvesting and transporting, is Black and brown folks. And so I've been reconnecting with coffee and trying not to feel guilty about it. But then I also have my green juice. So water, coffee, and green juice are the trifecta of my morning beverages.
I love that, man. That sounds very familiar. I think we're in alignment there. What is your favorite spice?
Favorite spice? I don't. Can it be a spice blend, or does it have
of course.
Okay. Bad. Bad is the melange of spices that come together, and this blend is one of the cornerstones. I would argue, I guess, the cornerstone of a lot of Ethiopian and Eritrean cooking. And I keep bad here for both using to enhance dishes when I'm making them, but sometimes just to sprinkle on things. Like bad popcorn is one of my favorite little snacks to have, I have to say.
Nice. Yeah, I think I noticed that come up quite a few times in Black food in your recent book.
Mm-hmm.
All right, where have you not been that is high on your list to travel to?
Wow. Where have I not been? Huh. I could think deeply about this, but I'm just going to say what comes to mind: Cabo, Mexico. And I'm actually going there for, my wife and I are going to be traveling there in a couple months to celebrate the 50th birthday of a good friend of ours. So I'm excited about Cabo, and I'm so excited about just being on a beach and just getting away from everything. So yeah, Cabo.
Well, happy travels, man. Sounds like you need a break, and Cabo's a good spot for that. So yeah, you'll get some rest and relaxation. So last one of these, Bryant. Who, past or present, would you most like to host at an intimate dinner party, and what would you prepare?
Woo! Wow. I'm going to answer that in two ways, because there is the dinner that I would like to have with Edna Lewis, the person that is often described as the grand dame of Southern cooking, a major inspiration on my work. Her book, A Taste of Country Cooking, was such a revelation, and discovering her when I was a culinary student and felt like there were very few role models that I had. She was certainly the person that I felt like I wanted to emulate in so many ways, from her, celebration of hyper local food from, Freetown, Virginia, where she's from. Me being from the South could definitely relate to that, having family with agrarian roots in the rural South, and, them bringing all those traditions to the city, Memphis, where I grew up. I think about her pride and her Blackness, and just always celebrating, being an African in North America through her, the way she dressed and styled her hair and her jewelry. And certainly when I was in culinary school, being like the only Black male and just one of a few people of color in my class, I was, fist in the air when I learned about her, just be like, she's like repping Black culture hard. So anyway, I'd love to have a meal with her, and I would make recipes from her book, A Taste of Country Cooking. But, in terms of just the person that I think about almost every day, one of my favorite creative people, the rapper MF Doom, who passed away, I think it was 2020, when he passed away in October of that year. And I, in terms of just creativity, humor, dedication to craft, general brilliance, he's one of my biggest inspirations, and I would love to have a meal with him and make him whatever he wants. But he, the thing about him, he was a MC, but he's also a producer. And I love that he emphasized food often in his music. I mean, he literally has an album called Food, where he kind of delves into different, topics and plays with food a lot. But as a producer, MF Doom, his moniker metal fingers doom on the boards. He has a number of I guess I would say CDs, but he has a number of projects that are all beats, and all the beats are named after herbs. They're called fresh herbs. That's the name of the collection. So, one song might be like hibiscus, and another one is like, cumin. And I just loved that food is such a thread throughout his work. I'd love him regardless because of his brilliance, but the fact that he's really into food just makes me love him even more. So I'd love to have a meal with Doom.
Man, that's fascinating. Yeah, that would be a new one for me. Edna Lewis, I'm of course very well aware of, and Taste of Country Cooking. I'm a novice at when it comes to the kitchen, although I've spent a lot of my whole life in restaurants. But her corn pudding, I can throw down on. Man, I make that corn pudding that she does. Yes, so I'm good there. All right, so let's jump in. I'd like to just kick things off. How are you doing? How are you feeling these days?
I am feeling overstretched, overwhelmed. I have to say, in the spirit of full disclosure, I knew that this new phase of my career with my publishing imprint and Black food would catapult me to the stratosphere. I didn't realize it would happen so quickly. The book has been out since October. And, as you mentioned, the response has just been phenomenal. I mean, critically acclaimed. Sales have been great, and just general goodwill. It just makes me so happy to just see posts every single day with folks continuing to discover the book. Like, I love this book. Thank you. This is somebody told me yesterday that they have given that Black food away as gifts to over 50 people. And I was just taken aback, like not 50 people. And I think that attests to the vision that we as a team had for the book. And we were very clear. We saw the vision. We knew it would manifest it, and we put all the pieces in place to actualize that vision. And, along with the success of the book and the excitement about the imprint, I'm getting a lot of opportunities thrown my way, from, media opportunities to speaking engagements and other appearances. And last night I was just feeling overwhelmed because it's Black History Month, and as you can imagine, a brother's really busy this month. Shout out to those who actually thought about Black History Program months ago and didn't just contact me like last week trying to put something together at the last minute. But I have to say that I had to just kind of shift my thoughts around the coming weeks because they're going to be extremely busy. And one of my inspirations in terms of just hustle is Kevin Hart. I love his grind and his hustle. And, he's one of the people who really inspired me at the beginning of the pandemic just to like recommit to my physical activity and just like doing 45 minutes of cardio every day, and then kind of embracing CrossFit a little later on. But I love his just work ethic, and it inspires me so much. And I think that for me, kind of reframing this month as this is my tour, in the spirit of like him doing a comedy tour and him getting in his zone and training. I'm like, you know what? This is my tour. I'm about to be super disciplined about getting my 8 hours of sleep every night, about, my physical activity, about, diet and hydrating and everything I need to do to be 100% so that I can fully embrace everything that's coming towards me this month and have fun with it. Like, I don't want to do it begrudgingly. I don't want to feel like, oh my God, I got to do this other speaking engagement that I'm getting paid for. It's just like, come on, like this is a dream for me. And trust me, there were years of struggle and years of just living from book deal to book deal and, doing lots of events and not getting paid what I thought I deserved to be paid. So to be in this position in this moment now just feels so good. And I knew that we would get here, but like everything, it takes time, it takes commitment, it takes grinding, it takes, just being connected to spirit and knowing that I can manifest whatever I want. So here we are.
Yeah, man, I feel you. There's a lot there, and we're going to come back to the book because it hit me in a lot of different ways that I want to touch on with you. And, as you're speaking about the demands on you, and in particular because of the fact that this is Black History Month, I'm reminded, because I'm a little bit older than you are, that there was a time when there was a void. We weren't busy, unless we were doing it for ourselves. And even then, it was in front of a smaller audience. But I want to come back to that. I want to, just take you back a little bit first, because I'm curious about your background and where the merger of African history and food kind of seemed to come together for you at NYU, studying under the professor that you studied under, the Professor Kelly. But was that where it started to come together, the two worlds that you've now really kind of made one, if you will?
I don't think I could talk about those things merging without talking about just my upbringing and growing up in this strong Black community in Memphis. And it's one of the things, Edna Lewis grew up in Freetown, Virginia, and this is a town that was founded by formerly enslaved Black folks. And it was just, all Black, all run town that nurtured and raised her. And I think about my upbringing in Memphis, and it was especially having lived in New York and now living in the Bay Area, and I just feel so lucky that I was able to live in this strong middle class neighborhood, and having so many just brilliant and powerful Black people who surrounded us. Like my doctor was Black, my dentist was Black, our attorney was Black. Like we just had Black folks who were excellent, and that always let me know that I could be excellent and do what I want. But in regard to the food piece, it's just like we were surrounded by food, and as I mentioned earlier, we had these agrarian roots in rural Mississippi and Tennessee and Arkansas. So obviously, my family coming to this city, Memphis, my grandparents, they brought with them the survival techniques and the, agrarian knowledge and the desire to connect with the land and grow our own food. And they were very deeply connected to our cultural foods, and I used to love spending time in my paternal grandfather's backyard and just hearing him just talk about, these traditions of, growing and cooking and eating what I describe as Black food. And so I always had a pride in these staple ingredients and flavor profiles and classic dishes of, the American South, but also, understanding that, African-American cuisine, the food that we kind of know as Black food in my mind, is the original modern global fusion cuisine. So hearing those stories, I didn't know this then, but ruminating on many of the conversations I had with my grandfather, he was talking about African diasporic food. So, just having that as my foundation, it's always something that I could draw upon. And I always say that all the work that I'm doing, everything that I'm talking about when I'm lecturing, when I'm writing about the foods that I'm celebrating, I'm standing on the shoulders of many ancestors who came before me, and just really kind of representing or repackaging in a modern context. But this isn't anything new, and I'm very clear about that. And in fact, when we talk about just kind of like this thread throughout my work of plant-based eating, despite the fact that, for a lot of people, especially the wider culture, when you hear the word vegan, so often, folks like Peter Singer, the philosopher who kind of solidified this idea or concept of veganism, or Francis Moore Lepay or John Robbins, the latter two being good friends and mentors of mine. But it's not just the traditional way that we might imagine vegans as these upper middle class white suburbanites, or more recently, young white hipsters living in cities. Like all the people I learned about veganism from when I was growing up were Black folks, from the Seventh-day Adventists in our community, from whom I first learned about this idea of just eating, a diet devoid of animal products, to My obligatory what I see is the obligatory phase of a lot of young Black men of my generation after reading the autobiography of Malcolm X, kind of being obsessed with the Nation of Islam and learning about the Honorable Elijah Muhammad's health ministry with his 2-volume collection How to Eat to Live, and then learning about the ITAL diet of Rastafarians, and then coming into contact with Dick Gregory's work and his book Cooking with Mother Nature, and learning about his dietary journey and his activism. And so I'm always uplifting this thread of Black-led food and health activism throughout the 20th century, not to mention KRS-One and Boogie Down Productions, the hip hop crew that really, I would argue, kind of like catalyzed my shift into food activism after I heard their song Beef, that's about factory farming. So, deep roots and many multiple inspirations of people of African descent growing up who really laid the foundation for me to do all the work that I'm doing now.
Yeah, thank you. I also read Afro-Vegan, your prior book, and the recipes that that you cover there and the stories that you tell, man, are really fascinating, and plenty of good food and good ideas in there about what we should eat. But I want to stay on for a moment Black food, because I feel that what you're working on several fronts here, Brian. And I'm going to read an excerpt from your introduction. Quote, "Black food is a communal shrine to the shared culinary histories of the African diaspora. These pages offer up gratitude to the great chain of Black lives and to all the sustaining ingredients and nourishing traditions they carried and remembered through time and space to deliver their kin into the future." You continue, "Black food also includes moving visual art through thought-provoking essays and imaginative poetry that will encourage spiritual and intellectual exploration, renewal, and growth." This is a big but necessary endeavor. And I feel like this is like healing. It's offering healing through understanding culinary history, food pathways, art, and the written word. Am I the only one that has felt that, or am I onto something with that feeling?
You're certainly onto something with that, brother. And I just feel like you hit it on the head, because that was really the intention that I and the team I assembled went into when we created this book. Just a little background, Black food. I won't say the idea of it, because the idea had been there since I started my residency at the Museum of the African Diaspora as chef in residence. And I had always thought about this brilliant and magical programming at the museum and how we could share it with the world. In the book itself, several of the chapters are literally, the titles are pulled from programming that I did at the museum, from Black Women, Food and Power, to the Black Queer Food, to the Land Liberation and Food Justice chapters. But, the catalyst for me, the thing that really just made it clear that this was the moment. There wasn't any need to wait for this book to come into the world, was in 2020, on the heels of the state murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and the kind of racial reckoning that followed, the uprisings, people who weren't clear then being more clear about the treatment of Black folks in this country. And there was a moment where I had to ask myself, well, what can I do in this historical moment to contribute to the moment, or the movement, I should say, because there was a lot happening on the ground. A lot of people were out in the streets, and I'm at a point in my life now. I have a family, I'm concerned for their safety, and we would, do the caravan protests. But I really felt like this book would be my gift in this moment, because we did need we needed healing. And when I approached all the contributors, what I told folks was that we can't talk about our history, or the history of our food, or, the way our food is migrated and shift and change, without acknowledging the ways in which we've been historically marginalized and erased and brutalized and all these things. But I didn't want that to be the focus of that book because I didn't think that was necessary right now. I think there are lots of texts that do that well. I wanted this book to inspire people. I wanted people to come from this book and not just, us, obviously, but whoever decided to be a part of the conversation. But I did let the contributors know that this book, the spirit of this book is FUBU, for us, by us. I didn't want, the white gaze to be in consideration at all. I wanted this to be a conversation that we're having honestly with each other and inviting the world in. And, the question I asked all the contributors is, what is our brilliance and our magic and our agency? Given Toni Morrison's she talks about racism being a distraction. And I asked everyone, well, what do our lives look like when we aren't distracted by like this albatross of racism and white supremacy around our neck? And that's what I wanted people to bring to the book. And that's the energy that was brought to it. And on that note, Brett, that there are 2 chapters in the book. There's literally the radical self-care and there is the leisure and lifestyle. There are literally chapters in the book that are geared towards us just healing and caring for ourselves and ensuring that, we're okay, especially in such a tumultuous historical moment.
Well, I want to come back to that. And, it's interesting you opened with, this planned trip to Cabo and the need for some restoration. So, but I do want to come back to that. But before I do, Bryant, you used the symbolism of the Sankofa bird. You talk about that. And for me, that really, really resonated, man. The idea of this bird that's flying forward with, that keeps looking back. And then the egg, it's in a shell and it is symbolic of the future that has yet to happen. And when you're talking about how we as Black Americans see ourselves, define ourselves, view ourselves, too often, I think we stop at the definition of ourselves as it relates to slavery and not see a broader, richer, more cultural view that, as you said, there are works that that people are involved with that are doing that well, but it's also nice to lift that off of us for a moment. And then what do we talk about? What's important to us? And that's what I got from your book and some of the brilliant essays and essayists that you recruited to write. So I just wanted to make sure that I let you know that really landed for me.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Let's move on to something that I touched on in the opening that also gets addressed in Black Food in one of the brilliant essays from an assortment of writers. This one from Therese Nelson speaking to the void created by lack of inclusion. And she writes, at the precise moment America was learning how to dine like the French and building a more robust culinary industry, hard-won civil rights were finally being afforded to Black cooks, giving them access to new professional opportunities outside of kitchens. This created a culinary generation gap that made the subsequent whitewashing of food an easier task to accomplish. She goes on to say, this fact becomes powerful commentary on the struggle modern Black food creatives have had in making headway in an industry that have a curiously short historical memory. What ensues is the creation of a multi-trillion-dollar culinary industry that disempowered Blacks, stripping them of their historical birthright, and then asks why they don't have more authority and visibility in the marketplace. So she later talks about in the early 2000s feeling unseen, trying to be heard, talking about stories involving Black foodways. And I can tell you, man, as a second generation Black restaurateur, what she's writing about is what I experienced as a restaurateur, where I'm not saying that I've gotten some press coverage over the years, but it's different when you're being written about from the perspective of someone that understands where you're coming from. So can you unpack any part of what she said and address what inspires you about what she had to say in that quote?
I can remember a time where even in my own career, it's just been interesting. And, and I have to say that when I first started doing this work, it would often, I think my feelings would be a little hurt because in my mind, my work was primarily about, helping to change the habits and attitudes and politics of Black folks. And when I would do events, it would be mostly white people in the audience. And I just would wonder, well, what am I doing wrong? How can I resonate with this bigger audience? And I think, when Vegan Soul Kitchen was published, then that shifted things because I think it was clear that this was a book that was culturally relevant for a lot of Black folks, and they saw themselves in this. But in my heart, I've always felt like that's the work. That's the reason I'm doing this work. I understand the ways in which this industry so often centers European food, and the just the idea of Black food. It's so often at the margins, and it's misunderstood, disrespected. I just think about the fact that for so many people, they can't even imagine the diversity and the complexity of these culinary traditions throughout the African diaspora. And, when people hear this term Black food, what I found is that they are imagining one or two things. As you mentioned earlier, the kind of antebellum survival foods upon which many enslaved Africans had to rely. Obviously, the institution of slavery wasn't a monolith, and it looked different depending on the way that enslaved Africans would grow and cook food and eat it. Looked different depending on the geographic location and the disposition and financial status of the plantation owner. So there are just so many factors that even kind of push back against that idea of some monolithic like slave food. But then the other thing is, I think people have reduced it to the comfort foods of the cuisine, the kind of the food that one might find at a soul food restaurant, the deep fried, animal products and overcooked vegetables and sugary desserts. I don't deny that either of those things are part of this larger, more diverse culinary tradition. The problem that I've had, or at least that was very apparent early on, is that the wider culture, I don't think that they, and just thinking about like the media, thinking about publishing, thinking about like television, I think there was no room for us stepping outside of these very narrow boxes that they had for our cuisine and for the people who are representing it, which, I think is one of the reasons that Vegan Soul Kitchen resonated, because it was playing off of this idea of quote unquote soul food, but, giving it kind of a plant-based twist. But I just think that it's beautiful being in a place now where you have, these Black creatives who aren't waiting anymore. Folks who are just creating their own opportunities. Is one of the reasons where I felt the need to pitch this publishing imprint that we got from Penguin Random House, because I think it's about us owning and driving and creating the solutions to these problems that we've seen historically, because it's clear we can't wait for the wider culture to fix these problems for us. I think there's so many systemic problems that I'd like to use my platform to continue to, push for solutions that are driven by us. Even you mentioning just restaurants, there should be, with the number of Black millionaires and billionaires that we have, I think there should be funds, all types of investment funds, just to help support, restaurateurs and people who are hoping to get some projects off the ground, especially in a period where this industry has been struggling so much. So I feel like we're in a better place, but obviously there's a lot of work to be done. Yeah. And I really hope to continue to be a part of creating these solutions.
No, it's important, man. And you bring up, several important topics, but I'll touch on the last one. I'd had Chef JJ Johnson on the podcast a while back, and I know he has since gotten some funding, but we were talking about that very subject, Bryant, where, he's got a great concept with his rice concept in New York. And, it had several ongoing conversations with folks whose names I won't mention, but prominent African Americans with means. And, while Sweet Greens continues to attract funding and some of the other more well-known white-owned businesses, white-owned restaurant chains and groups have no trouble attracting African American funding, we entrepreneurs and restaurateurs do have trouble with that. And I think the more that you talk about this, the more I think we'll bring it, into being, and we'll talk it into into existence. So I'm fully in support of that conversation continuing. I wanted to bring into the conversation something that the historian Jessica B. Harris wrote in her essay in Black Food titled Out of Africa, Musings on Culinary Connections to the Motherland. She wrote, quote, "We know the continent is vast, one into which the United States could fit 3 times." That blew me away, just the thought of that. But in fact, we know very little about this continent that is ringed in legends, and even less about its foodways. So, Brian, as someone who has studied history, where would you say we are on the arc of discovery about what has not been known or practiced by Black Americans, if what Jessica B. Harris is saying is true, that we know so little about the continent, its foodways, and its legends? Where are we?
I think we're in a great place. I think the most important thing is that these stories are told by people who come from these cultures and understand them deeply and have studied them and have lived experience in these cultures. And I think it's important, this professor at the University of North Texas, Jennifer Wallach, writes about, the multiple narratives of Black food. Mm-hmm. There are no singular narratives, there are so many. And I think that reality was actually one of the when I was approaching Black food, I was very clear that the most authentic book that I could help put together would be one that gave voice to, that allowed the people who are working in this field, who have these experiences, who are living and traveling throughout the Black diaspora, to tell their stories and to talk about their most authentic connection to these traditions, these histories, these memories, and these recipes. And, as you know, this is a departure from my body of work in that this is not a vegan cookbook. And most of, all my prior books are vegan cookbooks, but it was one of those decisions where I knew that in order to tell the most authentic story, I didn't want to force this book to be something that it shouldn't be. And what the book should be is a book of these diverse voices, as I mentioned, reflecting on and envisioning, Black food in a way that is most authentic and, makes the most sense for them, and then giving us the opportunity to listen and learn.
It's a powerful format, man, between the essays and the art and then the recipes. I mean, you're just in a mindset where, it's where you want to be. I find myself, cracking this book open and having a little Cabernet, man, and putting my feet up and a little something soft in the background. And it transports me. The last quote I want to read here is from the historian Michael Twitty, from his essay in your book entitled Footsteps in Motion, Migration and Black Food. He writes, quote, "And yet there was trauma. New invaders came and left less than they took. Trauma moved food as fast as trade and expansion by foot and ship. The African Atlantic would represent the mass transfer of a third of Africa's population to the Western world. More bodies would arrive this way than from Europe until the 1820s, and with them an entire 70,000 years of eating, cooking, searching, hunger. Enslavement was the cause of the movement. It meant new, unfathomable pangs to come, pangs of exile, then an exhausting ache for memory to keep the culture alive despite the whip, the gun, violations of body and spirit, and a demand to forget." Whew, that's powerful stuff, man. Why was it important to you to include these voices, Brian? And what does it say, man? There's such a rich pool of talented writers, that can speak to this.
I think it says that, going back to your last question, that we're in a good place. I think we're in such a great place that there's, immense interest among Black folks in not just owning a restaurant or, being a contestant on a cooking show, but, folks who are going back to graduate school and, getting advanced degrees that are, doing research projects around Black foodways, you have so many people who are like interested in just the multiple fields that I think often folks don't know about, from like, because people know about like being a writer. Yeah, I'm interested in writing a book, but then things like food photography and food styling and prop styling. And I think, because I've always had this approach where I like to start with the visceral, although a book like this has a lot of heady intellectual ideas and essays in them, I don't necessarily think that that's the best way to create the widest table. I think there are a lot of educational class assumptions that we make when it's about just appealing to the intellect. And that's why beauty is so important to me. That's why recipes have always been forward in my work, because I know that feeding someone a delicious plant-based meal is a much more powerful way to help them think differently about their consumption than haranguing them about the ills of factory farming, And so I'm saying that to say that I just love this younger generation of just seeing the excitement that folks have about being in this field and looking at all these novel approaches that people are bringing to the food space. And so, I think it's important for the OGs like Twitty and me and JJ Johnson and Jessica Harris and Tony Tipton Martin, and the list goes on, for us to, one, ensure that we're passing down this knowledge, and that, folks need to know that in this moment where you can, I see a lot of younger folks getting these big book deals and lots of money thrown at them and getting opportunities to do shows and opportunities to do a lot of things that, people of our generation, and especially of Jessica Harris's and Tony Tipton Martin's and, Edna Lewis generation, if you want to go even further back, folks had to scrap and scrape for us to get here. There were lots of like fights. There were lots of moments of just feeling like we were being disrespected and unseen, and we've pushed through. And I think that it's important that we have this intergenerational conversation. And this goes back to my emphasis on Sankofa. That's just, for me personally, I'm always thinking about this concept, not just as a historian, but as a human being, knowing that the most powerful way forward is for us looking back and learning these best practices and, stories, and really connecting with older generations so that we can have it for this present moment, but also so we can transmit that and ensure that the future generations are connected to these histories and memories as well.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Good point. I know you mentioned that the when you're serving someone a delicious vegan meal, maybe the discussion around the dysfunctional food system is not sustainable and it's dysfunctional. Maybe that's not the time for that conversation, but that is, of course, part of the conversation. And you are a food justice advocate. So can you talk a little bit just about how the food system is dysfunctional and not sustainable, and explain, if you will, the term agroecology?
Well, the thing about talking about our our food system and the multiple problems that we see in our food system is that, there's so many ways that we can unpack that. And I guess I'd like to start by talking about the problems that I focus on, because we could talk about like the issues that small to mid-sized farmers in rural areas are struggling with. We could talk about, issues around, like farmers internationally. As you probably know, the emphasis of my work has been addressing this reality that so many communities across the country deal with the lack of access to healthy, fresh, and affordable and culturally appropriate food, and the impact that has had on the health of our communities. We know that, over the past several decades, there's been an exponential rise in preventable diet-related illnesses among African Americans. And, so much of that is connected to what we're eating. I think it's important to note that while we're focusing on food, we can't look at food in a vacuum. We need to understand that, most communities that suffer from food injustice, these are the same communities that are dealing with, industries that are coming into these communities and poisoning them. So environmental racism, these are the same communities that have very few jobs, and oftentimes the jobs that are available don't pay a living wage. These are the same communities that are dealing with, these broken educational systems, with these segregated and underfunded public schools. So, we need to understand that lack of access to healthy, fresh, affordable food is simply one indicator of material deprivation in many of these historically marginalized communities, right? But at the same time, we do need to focus on food, and we do need to ensure that we're empowering people and communities to feed themselves and to be the ones who, because the thing that I think separates food justice from this idea of the food movement, the food movement being this kind of movement that I think a lot of people would, kind of point to the Bay Area as being a major site for kind of catalyzing this interest in, supporting small farmers, small to mid-sized farmers, and eating, local foods that are locally grown and sustainably grown. A lot of the work that Alice Waters kicked off with Chez Panisse and just the whole movement that she started, or I should say that, she was a part of pushing forward. But the thing about food justice that I always remind people is that it moves beyond advocacy, it moves beyond direct service, and it calls for organized responses that are owned and driven by the people living in these historically impacted communities. And it's not outsiders coming in and say, this is how you should fix the problem. But it's the people knowing that they know the problem. They have a lot of great ideas for solutions, but they need power and resources shifted to them to actually help them to, create those solutions. So anyway, this idea, you talked about agroecology, and I think it's an important concept that we should all understand more, this idea of just really understanding how, when we center the production of food, that is done in a way that doesn't ruin our environment, that's, centered on sustaining the natural environment. I think that just goes back to, this reality that we have to have an approach that pushes back against capitalism when we talk about transforming our food system, because the reality is that we're living in a world where over 50% of our food system is controlled by 5 multinational corporations. And capitalism does what capitalism does. Like, these corporations, they're invested in increasing the profits for their shareholders. That's their main allegiance. Obviously, if there are, where it's been funny just seeing how the world is, or I shouldn't say the world, but a lot of the corporations over the past decade or so, they caught on, there's an interest in veganism, so then they start, of course, there's the market impetus for them to create products that are marketed towards vegans. But I always say, I'm going to go over to Whole Paycheck or whatever overpriced corporate-owned health food store and get me my organic, vegan, gluten-free water, and I use that example because it's just funny to see how so many of these products are being marketed as healthful or, natural. I mean, really, they use a lot of terms that don't even have a legal definition, but they're just trying to convince us to buy products. And so that's why I think that the production of food has to be in the hands of the people, and we have to invest in, really driving solutions. And it's been exciting seeing it happen. I'm seeing a lot of young people going back to the land, inheriting land that their families might have owned, taking over these legacy farms. As you said, just in the food space, in terms of restaurants, a lot of people really, putting investment into just entrepreneurship and creating businesses that we own, that are not just putting money into these corporations that are in some distant place, but are ensuring that local communities can thrive and grow, and that we can, employ people, we can give people skills, we can help young people have, express their brilliance and creativity and learn skills that they can then take into their adult lives. So, yeah, it's an exciting place that we're in.
Yeah, you bring up several really interesting points and concepts and ideas. I think back, Brian, too. We opened a place called Post and Beam in South LA in 2011, 2012. And I remember doing an interview. I don't remember who it was with, but when the first time that I heard the term food deserts, I was asked about during an interview, and I really hadn't. I mean, any of us who've spent time in urban neighborhoods. I'm from New York City, so I certainly know what places in Harlem look like and what kind of stores and dominated those neighborhoods. But in South LA, I don't have to tell you an overabundance of check cashing, liquor stores, 7-Elevens, and not a lot of healthy food. But we also felt, though, Brian, as we tried to introduce a garden, an on-site vegetable and herb garden, and variety of foods along with some of the staples that we know and we love. It was a bit of turning a big ship in the night in terms of getting the response from the neighborhood the neighborhood to understand, what we were trying to do in terms of trying to offer a more balanced approach to a dining out experience in that particular neighborhood. What would you say to that? I mean, I think that as the chorus has certainly gotten louder, and this was going back to 2014, 15 when, we were experiencing that. And by now, you look at South LA and other places have popped up. Certainly, Atlanta, there are vegan restaurants in Atlanta, in Detroit. I mean, and Black folks are well aware of vegan food and healthier eating, but there has been a need to kind of turn that ship culturally. Have you felt that?
I mean, for sure. And I think, there's been a culture of unhealthy eating in a lot of our communities. And part of the reason is, I think the main reason is our industrialized food system. I'm always careful about talking about this culture of unhealthy eating or overindulgence or whatever, because I don't want to ever appear to be blaming the victim, right? And we know that structurally, many people are just dealing with what's available. When as you mentioned, in neighborhoods like South LA or East Orange, I don't know, South Memphis, Tennessee, West Oakland, California, it's the same neighborhood across the country where, as one of my colleagues who did a lot of food justice work in New York said, you could find a gun quicker than you could find an organic apple, right? And so I think that, when you have a situation where, I'll put it like this. When I first moved from Brooklyn to Oakland in 2008, they did a study in West Oakland, California, the same community where the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense was founded in the late 60s. And there were 53 corner stores and liquor stores, and there wasn't one single supermarket. And I don't in any way, I wouldn't argue that a supermarket, a corporate-owned supermarket, is a cornerstone for food security or food justice. But I think every community deserves one, especially when these corner stores and liquor stores, upon which many of the residents of these communities are reliant for their food sources, we know what they sell. Lots of cigarettes and tobacco and processed and packaged food. You'll be lucky to find any fresh food in these places. And when you do, it's often bruised and battered. And to add injury to insult, so often the prices of the same items that you might find in a conventional supermarket in a more affluent neighborhood, they're double the price sometimes in these little corner stores and liquor stores. And so for me, I just feel like we can't just talk about changing the culture without changing the material reality of these communities. And I know from talking to people, because the thing is, when you talk to a lot of the older residents there, like, they have memories and connection to eating a lot of farm fresh food, because a lot of these folks migrated from the South. I'm thinking about like the West Coast and just, with the second great migration, a lot of people moving out here for different industries, and people talk about their farms that their nanas and their papas used to have, and how they would, grow up eating a lot of like fresh from the garden food. And it's almost like this cultural amnesia that our industrialized food system, and that, this kind of stretches a period where so many of the communities haven't had a lot of fresh food, where people, when I talk about these things, they're like, oh yeah, I forgot. My nana used to have, a little kitchen garden, or she used to be canning and pickling and preserving. And so I think it's, for me, the ship, it may seem insurmountable, but one, there's a lot of goodwill and excitement from folks in communities when they feel like they're part of the solution. Like, people don't like to feel like you're coming in and plopping down some solution to say, here, everything's fixed now, just act accordingly. People want to feel agency in creating solutions. They want to feel like they have ideas that can then, contribute to transforming communities. And that's why some of the most successful efforts that I've seen have been when you have these longstanding trusted institutions like, churches and other faith-based institutions or community organizations, who then couple the work that they're doing with some analysis around food and food justice. Right. And so like that church that has that huge industrialized kitchen that's been pretty much unused for 2 decades, when they activate it and start teaching cooking classes, and maybe they have a lot of land that's being unused, and they grow food on the land, and then they're giving it away to the church members, or allowing folks to come in and learn about, making like pickles and preserves, then that like creates this excitement among people. But I just want to quickly go back to my point around why we can't think we just can spin our way out of, whatever solution, like food injustice or, whatever. These big corporations, I just think people need to understand that they have very little stake in addressing environmental issues, and addressing animal rights, and addressing workers' rights. And so, we can try to do what we can to push them to get things right, but I think it's just bigger than the feelings of a CEO or people within the institutions. This is structural, and I think this is a moment where we have to think about creating our own institutions outside these existing ones. And when people do that, then they're much more invested in seeing them thrive and changing their realities.
Well said. Mark Bittman, the former New York Times columnist, has a book that addresses some of those subjects called Animal Vegetable Junk that I would recommend for anybody that's also interested in this subject. So, Brian, we're winding down here, and I probably know the answer to this question, but I'm curious, and so I'll ask you anyway. Is there a brick and mortar in your future anywhere? You're going to open up a place?
Not at all. Not at all. Well, not a restaurant. I think there was a part of me when I was in culinary school for a second where I was like, maybe I want to work in a restaurant. I mean, I went into culinary school with a very clear vision of getting the skills to then, create this organization, Be Healthy, which use cooking as a way to empower young people living in some of the most marginalized communities in New York City. But there are moments where I was like, well, maybe I could have a restaurant, or maybe I could work in a restaurant. But I'll say this, and I know you're very familiar with this. My friends who have restaurants, that's their whole life. If they're not at the restaurant, they're thinking about it. They're shopping. They're doing the paperwork. They're just, it never stops. And I just want to create a life where I have spaciousness to both take care of myself, but also be present with my wife and my girls. But I do have a vision for opening a brick and mortar creative studio. Zen Me Creative is a studio that I really see as a house for all the projects that my family has, from my oldest daughter, who's a brilliant, cellist and pianist, and now she's learning music production. If she's making beats and she wants to sell her beats, they can go through Zen Me. My youngest daughter, who's a visual artist, if she's selling her paintings and other artwork, it can go through there. And I think it'd be nice to have a physical space where we can invite people in for meetings and exhibitions and collaborations and whatever else. So that is definitely a long-term vision that I have.
Yeah, that's beautiful, man. And I can tell you, you're smart to put your and smart to recognize the work and hours and the never ending responsibility of owning, any small business, but certainly a restaurant, as we all know. Folks always used to tell me when they asked me what I do, oh, I'm in the restaurant. Oh man, that's such a hard way to make a living. Restaurant business is so hard. And Brian, I tell you, man, I never really felt that way. Until I got a little bit older and my body started to feel the mileage that I had put in on various floors over the years. But the wealth of the relationships, man, and the people and the experiences, for me, that was worth it. It was the extension of my social life, man, and I got so much out of it. And as I hear you speak, I'm reminded that during those decades, these opportunities that you now speak of were not available, right? We did not have. My father had a restaurant, Black-owned restaurant in Manhattan, basically ignored by the mainstream press. We just weren't on their radar. So as these stories start to get told, don't forget the story of the restaurateur, because in some way, I think the Alberta Wrights and the Ed Smalls, the Smalls Paradise, and some of these folks have carried the baton a long distance. And I think that there's worthy recognition that's due in that regard.
I totally agree with you, Brad. And I have to say that my creative director, Amanda Yee, she comes from a family of restaurateurs here in Oakland. And it's a conversation that we've had many times. And I do think this is a story that needs to be told, and we need to be documenting and just hearing from people who have held it down in the entrepreneurial space, especially, as you mentioned, in, these moments where, I mean, look, if a lot of my friends who are restaurateurs think it's hard now, I'm just like, imagine what folks were going through 50 years ago. So kudos to your family and all those who pushed through and, really provided a blueprint for a lot of these younger folks to be able to build upon.
Yeah, brother. Appreciate that. You have the mic, as they say. So before we go, man, both Ambassador Shabazz and I have a sweet tooth. And I was wondering if you could tell us what your favorite dessert is of the moment. I was kind of feeling this coconut rice pudding with nectarines that I saw in Afro-Vegan, but I'm going to let you tell me what you like.
Well, I'll tell you, I'm going to answer that in two ways. One, my favorite dessert from Black food that I've had several times since the book is published is this vegan blueberry cheesecake by the brilliant Malcolm Livingston III, Bronx-born, LA-based chef who's a part of the Ghetto Gastro Collective. But my favorite dessert, hands down, and it's simple, but it's just the thing that brings me so much joy. A chocolate cupcake. My friend Catherine gave us half a dozen cupcakes that she made. These brilliant vegan chocolate chip cupcakes with chocolate icing and some sprinkles on top. You give me one of those and some cold almond milk, I'm good to go.
Man, see, I knew you would do that to me, brother. But thank you, man, for that. That's a great visualization. I'm gonna have to look that up. But Bryant Terry, busy guy, you're doing a lot, man. Great work. So love what you're doing, brother. And I really appreciate you taking the time today to join us here at Corner Table Talk. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. And whenever you want to have me back, I'm here.
So here we go, folks, with How We Move and Ambassador Shabazz. We are talking Bryant Terry and Black food, Afro-Vegan. That brother's got a lot going on, as he said. He's busy, and his books are worthy. What'd you think?
Well, he's definitely a maestro of plenty. I mean, I was not surprised by the countenance, but delighted by the depth and the range and the continued journey of his exploration as it relates to all fusions of his life. He first of all, he had me at Abbey Lincoln. I don't even hear people mention Abbey Lincoln's name, and so it took me back nostalgically. I don't know his age, but it took me back nostalgically and enabled me to really tune into the depth of his authenticity, no matter what artery of social culture he's diving into or history he's diving into. It seems that everything I learn about Bryant Terry is to the fullest. He does not let go. He's unyielding in his quest to uncover information, and then fuses them, then brings it back home, makes it palatable, and delivers it in a way that the layman or the novice can feel their place at the table.
Yeah, I really enjoyed him. And, the book itself, Black Food, as I said, as I was speaking with him, it's so rich in, as you discover, one chapter after another, one essay after another, one recipe after another. And this beautiful picture just starts to formulate in your mind about what we can do and what he has done. Correct. And how it represents, our culture, our food, our art, our history, our music. It's all there, and it's an experience read.
Well, it's a gorgeous book, and not only are the chapters fascinating, but it's like an art piece within itself. It's something that you would have on your shelf, and not just the outside because it's colorful, but as soon as you open it up, the inside jacket is just a kind of a montage of words and names and tribute and honor and homage, which is also chronicled again in the back of the book in the index. It just took me back to days of old when you go into the library and everything you needed to find would be under that alphabetical order. Just brilliant piece of work, and makes me want to dive in, crawl up in a corner and savor. I've said to you the other day, we need an RV. we need some kind of how you move corner table or corner table how you move RV, because I'm ready to touch down. I was thinking about his journeys and where he goes to get his inspirations, and I said, yeah, that's a ticket.
Yeah, I hope Airstream is listening and decides, that we're worthy of a little sponsorship here. But
first stop is Zen Me. I dug what he said he was going to create for his daughters. That also moved my heart.
Yeah,
creating that space. First of all, honoring. He described both daughters with such devotional love, and it made me want to meet them, be in their spaces, and kind of cop a squat at Zen Me.
Yeah. So recommending Black Food and Afro-Vegan. If you're interested in either of these two works, they're really, really brilliant pieces of work done by Bryant Terry, our guest today, Ambassador Shabazz. How we move. Thank you so much for joining and your words of wisdom.
Thank you, dear brother.
See you soon.
Corner Table Talk is hosted by Brad Johnson, produced by Brad and Linda Ailes Johnson. Theme music, Life Goes On by Bryce Vine. Executive producer, Ken Johnson. Find the Corner Table Talk podcast wherever you get your podcast. Follow, subscribe, rate, and leave a comment. Corner Table Talk is a Mean Old Lion Media production.